how do we shift the thinking in terms of getting people to understand? Because it is quite big picture thinking.
It is.
And I guess it does help advance organisations in achieving their goals on so many levels. And gender equality is one piece of the pie, but when you start to explain it the way you have in terms of showing that actually it's all tied together.
Yeah. Look, it is a real challenge, and I think all of the evidence is pointing to thinking less about what you do, and that's why our strategy is always around thinking about where we don't want to stuff more information into people. I mean, gender equality has been a challenge for a very long while. Certainly, if we think about the last 25 years, the tools and the levers that we would pull in order to make an impact haven't changed that much. If you have a look at our gender equality indicators, they have been fairly stable. They're the things that both reflect the gender equality experience in an organisation or in an industry, but they also reinforce it. So it's both a lever for change, but also a mirror to see how well you're tracking. So that hasn't actually changed, certainly in the 22 years that I've been doing this. The way that what has changed is the thinking, and that thinking certainly for us is about thinking about creating change through what we call a coalition of influence. And that is about understanding that it's not just one person's role, one level of the business, one part of the industry that is responsible for really taking action on gender equality and getting the momentum. The idea is to actually identify a coalition of influence within your organisation and really focus less on, I say, counting women and more on making women count and thinking about the outcome. So what is the experience of a given employee within that particular business? So we start sort of thinking about it in those terms and think, okay, what actually goes on? Let's take a step back and think about what goes on in organisations. You've got a board and an executive. They're signing off on strategies. They're signing off on a whole range of things. And when we go to the website, for example, and we see this beautiful diversity and inclusion plan on there, that it does include women, how are those two things coming together? Does that board, does that executive have the language and the literacy to be able to have a contest of ideas on whether or not this particular strategy is going to be have the desired impact and help us to get towards what we're saying we will do? When we've sat down and talked to a lot of boards and C-suites, they've gone, no, not really. And, you know, again, thinking intelligently about it, why would they? When we think about MBA programs, when we think about accounting, economics degrees, those kinds of things, which really are the pipeline for that decision-making governance level, gender equality and diversity at best is an elective. Profit and loss is not, macroeconomics not. So there's some mainstream knowledge that the leaders of this particular industry have in those kinds of things and have not had the opportunity, I think, to think in those terms. And so it's like, the light, you can't unring a bell once you sort of start to see that. So your corporate giving programs, for example, your products, your services, when you apply the gender lens and we help them to understand what are some of the potentially gendered outcomes, that is a really powerful thing rather than seeing it as something sitting outside the boardroom. And we started to see that with ESG and things like that. So there's a way to tap into that with that literacy. The other part would be thinking about not just making it diversity, inclusion, and HR's job, but I do think the deciding factor in all of this is getting down to that line manager level, because when we think about what is it that is creating a gendered experience on a day-to-day level, it is the line managers that create your employee experience, whether it be through recruiting, whether it be through performance, performance reviews, your remuneration, your training, your development, all of that comes up to a line manager. And if they're not able themselves to articulate and understand what a gender-attuned leadership is and how to provide a gender equal outcome or experience across that, how can we expect them to deliver that? So it's sort of this holistic approach of looking at this coalition of influence and ensuring that you're not just knowing better, we stuff a lot more information at people. It's actually helping them to do better. So the practice, what actually happens at that action level, we're finding that gets a lot more long-term traction, and that is absolutely the way going together to actually create that transformation. So it's not just one part of the organisation's problem. Everyone's pulling in the same direction.
I love that idea that a line manager can play a big influence in terms of creating this change and closing the gender pay gap. Have you seen some really effective programs around enabling the line managers to have that, more forward way of thinking and behaving in the workplace?
In terms of mainstream rolling out these kinds of programs, that is yet to be undertaken. But what I can say is that there are some things that we know have actually created and generated within an individual organisation, some innovation and some change. So I can certainly talk to some of those. Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Again, one of the things that we think about is, say, parental leave. And we know that that's a strong lever, and there's a lot of information out there on when we start to provide that to men. What we're actually doing is it's not actually giving parental leave to men in the organisation that makes the difference. What it is it starts to break down this gendered norm of women care, men work. Men are the breadwinners, women work part-time, etc., etc. So it starts what we call the ideal worker norm breaks down. What we've sort of found, and some organisations have done this, where actually when we go and read the research, men say that they feel quite cut out of that. They don't have the opportunity. They feel it's the woman's role. They own the leave. They'll get a look in. They're this secondary carer. When they change the policy, but also the practice that says, all right, everyone's taking primary carer leave in this organisation, and if you don't want to do that, you have to opt out. So it flips the script, and then they have to have a conversation with their manager. Now, their manager has been to some really good training that says working and parenting, particularly for first-time parents, it's like a bomb. But we tend to think of that being something that happens to women. But we don't realise that men also go through a transition because they've now got two bosses. They've got a child that they themselves want to see. They want to get home to support their wife, but often their own boss hasn't made any changes at all to the way that they work when they sit down and have a conversation about that. So they're not just talking about parental leave, but what happens when you step back into the workforce after that leave, that changes. That's a very different conversation, and it actually hasn't cost a cent.